Hey everyone, welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at the housing market and what we can expect in the coming year.
Right.
Thinking about folks who are maybe looking to buy a bigger place for their growing family, or folks who are
Downsizing.
empty nesters downsizing.
Yes.
Exactly. So that's what we're going to be looking at today.
We're going to be breaking down the November 2024 monthly market report to see what the data is telling us.
Okay. So let's dive right in. Now it's actually election day today as we're recording this, so that
A
adds
little wrinkle.
a little spice to the mix, wouldn't you say? We're analyzing this before we know who's actually going to be in the Oval Office.
It does, although there's a lot of information we can glean from what we already know about the market, even before that news breaks.
Exactly. So let's start with what's probably on everybody's mind. Are mortgage rates going to come down? I know that's a big question for a lot of those folks, especially those families who were feeling like they're stuck right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So the report highlights three main factors that are influencing mortgage rates right now. First, the labor market. Second, the outcome of the election, of course. And then finally, the possibility of inflation roaring back.
Okay, so three potential curveballs.
Yeah.
Let's break those down. Starting with the labor market, we did just get that new jobs report, right?
We did, and there are some interesting insights in there. So the Fed has this thing called a dual mandate, and it's basically to keep unemployment low and prices stable. And what we're seeing is most of the job growth is concentrated in government and healthcare, while sectors like manufacturing and tech are sort of,
Flatlining.
flatlining, exactly.
I was looking at that chart from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and it shows, government healthcare job growth's up almost 4% year over year. But then some of those other sectors are totally flat or even declining.
Yeah, and that's a key factor here because it might actually lead to the Fed easing up on those interest rate hikes because they might see the economy cooling down.
Right.
And if they do ease up, we could see mortgage rates.
Go down.
Exactly. And in fact, most experts are predicting a more favorable mortgage rate environment as we head into 2025.
That's hopeful. I did notice that the report said something like 70% of potential buyers bailed on their search in the last year because prices were just
Too high.
too high.
Yeah.
So are we going to be, if everybody's waiting for those rates to come down, are we going to end up with
More competition?
a ton more competition?
It's very possible, yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about those high prices. What's the outlook there? Especially for folks who might be thinking of downsizing. Do they stand to make, a good return on their house?
So we have to think about this historically. There's this really interesting chart that tracks how many houses were being built going all the way back to the 1970s. What we see is that, compared to those boom years back then, we just haven't been building enough houses for decades.
Interesting. So there's a shortage.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah. And then what happens? We get those super low mortgage rates during and after the pandemic. Demand goes through the roof, and then prices go
Up, up, up. Yeah, it was like the perfect recipe for, price increases.
So will that trend continue?
Well, I think there's some good news here. The experts are predicting a much more reasonable pace of appreciation for 2025. We're talking like 2.5 to 4%.
Okay, so nothing like what we've seen the last couple of years.
Yeah, those double-digit increases are hopefully behind us.
All right, so maybe things are starting to, even out a little bit. But what about actually finding a house? Will all those families who need more space, will they actually be able to, get their hands on something, or is it going to be this bloodbath?
Well, the good news is that we're seeing more homes coming to market.
Okay.
The report shows that after a real dip during the pandemic, inventory has been steadily increasing.
So why is that? Why are we seeing more houses on the market?
Well, some of it is the higher mortgage rates making buyers a little hesitant. And then there's also the election.
Yeah.
People aren't sure what's going to happen. So a recent Redfin study actually found that almost a quarter of first-time home buyers are just waiting to see what happens after the election.
They're sitting on the sidelines.
Exactly.
So it's this big question mark hanging over everything.
It is.
Okay. But if we're seeing more inventory, does that mean that it's actually, it's going to be easier to find a place?
It's definitely a positive sign, but it's important to remember that every local market is different.
Right. Okay. So let's talk about the overall market. What's the prediction? Will things pick up next year, do we think?
Actually, yeah, the projections are pretty optimistic. Experts are thinking that total home sales will reach around 5.2 million in 2025. So that's a big jump from the lows we're expecting this year.
Wow. Okay, so that means
A much more active market.
okay.
And a lot of that has to do with the projected decline in mortgage rates we were talking about earlier. Lower rates means more people can afford to buy a house.
Right. Now, I know there's another question that's probably keeping some folks up at night.
The C word.
Is the market going to crash? We've all heard seen the headlines and the rumors. And I know a lot of people, especially if they lived through 2008, are, they're a little worried.
Understandably.
Yeah.
When the economy is uncertain, that's always a fear.
It's funny, I was talking to somebody the other day who is convinced, absolutely convinced we're headed for a crash and is advising all of their clients to wait like 4 years
Wow.
before they buy anything. I mean,
That's a long time.
it is. And this is where I think, having those, looking at the data and really understanding it is so important because it's easy to get caught up in the,
Fear-mongering.
fear-mongering,
Yeah.
exactly. But the market fundamentals are actually pretty different from 2008.
Very different.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. What are some of those key differences? What makes this market a little more sturdy, I guess?
Well, consumer debt is a big one. Yes, mortgage debt has increased, but it's still significantly lower than the total equity that homeowners hold.
Okay, so that's good. So people have more of a cushion.
Right. And in 2008, it was actually the reverse. Mortgage debt was higher than equity, which is, a recipe for instability.
Not good.
No, not good. So homeowners are actually in a much stronger financial position right now.
So it's not as risky.
Exactly. Most homeowners have those favorable mortgage rates we were talking about, and they've been building equity.
And 2008 was also such a, perfect storm, right? Like you had all those risky loans and the inflated values and nobody
was regulating anything.
Please.
Very different from today.
Right. Okay, so for both those, those families who are dreaming of a bigger space, A and D, those empty nesters who are ready to, downsize, what are some key takeaways as we're looking ahead to 2025? What should they be thinking about?
Well, total home sales are projected to increase. So that means more competition for buyers, but more options for sellers. Mortgage rates are likely to decline, which is good news for affordability.
Right.
And it looks like we're headed toward a more reasonable pace of price appreciation.
Okay.
So overall, I think we're looking at a more stable and predictable market, which is good news for everybody.
So whether you're buying or selling, it seems like, having a good plan and being strategic is going to be super important.
Absolutely. And remember, you don't have to do this alone. Talk to a real estate agent, a financial advisor, do your research. There are resources out there to help.
Yeah, you've got this.
You do.
Okay. Now, as we're wrapping up this part of our deep dive, we want to leave you with a question to think about.
Right.
How can you take what we've talked about today and use it to create a plan for your own personal housing goals? What does this information mean for you? What do you need to do?
We'll be right back after a short break to wrap things up.
Welcome back. So before the break, we were talking about how, the market is looking pretty different from 2008.
Mm-hmm.
And that's good news for anybody who's thinking about making a move. Yeah. There's a lot to be, optimistic about, even though, the election and the economy and everything, there's still a lot of uncertainty. So let's get practical. For those families who are dreaming of that bigger house, what does this all mean for them?
Well, if those mortgage rate predictions actually pan out, it could really, change the game for a lot of families who are struggling to afford, that extra bedroom or that backyard space. Imagine all those families who, they put their search on hold because they just couldn't swing it. Now they might be able to jump back in.
Right. But wouldn't they be, competing with, everybody else who was also waiting for rates to come down?
Exactly. And that brings us right back to that, inventory issue. There just aren't enough houses out there.
So what's the advice for those families then? What can they do to get a leg up in this, potentially crazy market?
Well, the first thing is, get pre-approved for a mortgage. It shows sellers that you're serious, and it gives you an advantage if there's a bidding war.
Right.
And also, it helps those families set realistic expectations and avoid falling in love with the house that they ultimately,
Can't afford.
Yeah. And that happens a lot. It's easy to get swept up in, the whole house hunting thing, but knowing your budget from the start is crucial.
Yeah, totally agree with that. So it sounds like preparation is key. Now, what about those empty nesters who are, thinking about selling their family home and downsizing, maybe to something smaller like a
condo or a townhouse?
Yeah, exactly. What does all of this mean for them?
Well, this whole increase in inventory thing, it's kind of a double-edged sword for them.
Yeah.
On the one hand, it means they'll have more options when they're buying their next place, but on the other hand, they're facing more competition when they're selling their current house.
So they've got to time it right, I guess.
It's all about timing, yeah. Finding that sweet spot where they can sell high and then buy at a decent price.
And this is where having a really good real estate agent can make all the difference, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Someone who knows the local market, they can really guide you through that process.
And speaking of timing, we talked about how a lot of buyers are just waiting to see what happens with the election. So depending on the outcome, we could see, a sudden surge in activity.
Absolutely. The election is definitely adding a layer of uncertainty right now. People tend to put off big decisions until things settle down.
So for those empty nesters who are like ready to go,
Yeah.
maybe now's the time to list their house,
It
right?
could be a strategic move, yeah.
You ahead of the rush.
Exactly. They might face less competition from other sellers,
Right.
and they'll have, a bigger pool of buyers to choose from.
Okay. So it sounds like timing is, everything in this market, no matter what side you're on.
Absolutely. It's about understanding those trends, doing your research, and just making smart decisions that align with, what you want to achieve.
Now let's talk about, that elephant in the room, that potential market crash.
Right.
We've said that the conditions are different from 2008, but I think it's still something that people are, concerned about.
Understandably. And the report actually talks about that fear, how it comes from those memories of what happened back then.
Right. But the data, like we've been saying, it tells a different story.
Very different.
Yeah. And one thing that I thought was really interesting was how the report kind of reframed the whole mortgage debt conversation. Because a lot of times you hear about, rising debt and it sounds like bad news, but the report had this whole other way of looking at it.
Right. It talked about how even though mortgage debt has increased, it's still much lower than the total equity that homeowners have.
Okay. And what does that actually mean for for people on the ground? For those folks who are thinking about downsizing, should they be worried?
Well, nobody can predict the future, but the data really suggests that homeowners are just in a much better financial position now than they were back then.
So they have more of a safety net.
Exactly. And remember, most people have locked in those low mortgage rates, and they have a good amount of equity to protect them if the market does dip.
So it's not like 2008 where, everything just sort of,
Yeah. Imploded.
yeah. Okay, so that's reassuring. So for both those, growing families and the empty nesters, what are some key things to keep in mind as we head into 2025?
Well, the report's projections show that total home sales are expected to go up, which means more competition for buyers, but also more choices for sellers.
Yeah.
Mortgage rates are likely to decline, which could really help with affordability.
Yeah.
And it looks like price appreciation is going to slow down a bit, which should make the market a little more stable and predictable.
Okay, so it sounds like, being prepared and having a good plan is going to be really important no matter what.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, especially in a market like this.
Right. So, we've covered a lot of ground today, but this is just the beginning. Remember, this deep dive is designed to give you a starting point, a solid foundation. But it's always a good idea to, talk to those experts like a real estate agent or a financial advisor who can give you more personalized guidance.
Definitely. Don't be afraid to reach out for help.
Yeah. Okay, so as we wrap things up today, we want to leave you with another question to think about.
Okay.
How can you use all of this information we talked about today to come up with a plan that really works for you? What are your goals? What steps do you need to take? Think about that, and we'll be right back. All right, we're back and ready to wrap up our deep dive into the housing market. We've been talking about all these different factors: mortgage rates, inventory, that potential crash. It's a lot to,
A lot to digest.
It is. And it can feel kind of overwhelming, especially when you're thinking about making a big decision, like buying or selling a house.
Yeah. And that's where I think that analogy from the report, the ship in the ocean.
Yeah. Being the ship, not the ocean.
Exactly. I think that's so helpful because it reminds us that even though the market might be doing its own thing, like going up into the...
Right. Like there are ways.
There are waves, yeah. We still have control over our own,
Our own decisions.
decisions, yeah.
So it's about having a plan, right?
Yeah.
Like knowing where you want to go and how you're going to get there, even if there are a few bumps along the way.
Exactly. It's about being proactive. Like, don't wait for the market to, dictate what you do. Make your own choices.
So for all those families out there who are bursting at the seams, they need more space. They're dreaming of that extra bedroom or that big backyard. Remember, you're in control. You get to decide when and how you make your move.
Yeah. And for those empty nesters who are, thinking about downsizing, maybe they want a smaller place, less to take care of. Maybe they want to travel or, pursue some hobbies. Remember, this is your chance to create the next chapter that you want.
This is your time.
It is.
So whether you're buying or selling, it's your journey. And the more information you have, the better decisions you can make.
Absolutely. And remember, there are people out there to help you. Real estate agents, financial advisors, even friends who've been through it. Don't be afraid to ask for advice.
That's great advice. We hope this deep dive has been helpful. That it's giving you some things to think about and maybe even like a little boost of confidence as you navigate this crazy market.
Yeah, we want you to feel empowered, like you've got the tools and the knowledge to make the best choices for you and your family.
So thanks for joining us. And remember, no matter what the market throws your way, you've got this.
You do.